Hi, it's Dwyer. It is April 6, 2025. GamblersAdvisory.com, a free site. BettingAngle.us, a free site. Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Folks, yesterday you had three of the more interesting heavyweights fight. Right? The narratives right now are off in boxing. I'm reading the paper and let's just say what's being reported isn't my take from looking at the fights. I'm just going to briefly talk about two heavyweights, then I'm going to talk about the one with the most upside. Right, first, Richard Torres. To front foot, what I want to encourage people to do is to look at the middle rounds of the fight. They're striking. Understand, after Torres comes out and after Timothy Bradley on the telecast tells you that Guido Vianello doesn't have an inside game, Vianello makes the adjustments and he actually starts to get the better of Richard Torres. Now my point to you is that's must-watch footage because Torres is an athlete. Torres is explosive. He's different than Ajit Kabayel. Kabayel is a technician. Kabayel's like basketball's Chris Mullin. You know, he can somehow get to your body in slow motion. He's not relying on athleticism. He's relying on technique, reading you, cues, experience. By contrast, Richard Torres is more quick twitch, I'm going to muscle my way inside. He's more physical, right? Let me make another point, too. There was a lot said about Torres' size. Folks, Torres' size is an advantage, not a disadvantage. Right? Do you think for a second that Joe Frazier, Mike Tyson, Rocky Marciano would be as successful as they were if they were regular-sized guys, right? When you're this level of athlete and this level of puncher, Torres is both. The fact that you're shorter than your opponent actually gives you an advantage, right? Vianello is something like 6'5", 6'6", right? So let me just say, Torres wins the fight, right? Recognize the fight is in the United States, and Torres is one of the best fighters in the United States. For me, the news in this fight is that Vianello, the taller guy, who has a jab, who has great lateral movement, who is an athlete himself, was able to solve Torres's constant bum rushing to his body. This is with the referee cautioning Vianello about holding. Right? My net verdict on that fight is that Torres still needs to think about a plan B. Right? You can't just be front foot heavy in the heavyweight division. Understand, that cost Mike Tyson later in his career. Evander Holyfield, Lennox Lewis, they knew where he was going to be. Right? With regard to Vianello, I was impressed going into the fight. I'm even more impressed now. Right? Vianello, if he fights a taller guy, right, or a guy his size, is going to know his way around the pocket a lot better, thanks to this fight. Now, Torres does make adjustments late and is able to stop the mid-fight comeback of Vianello, right? But let's just say Torres strikes me as too predictable. In my eyes, the top American heavyweight remains Zhilei Zhang. I know many of you are saying, hey, is Zhilei Zhang American? Folks, he lives in New Jersey. His corner, who he's close to, is an African-American corner. I believe his corner guy is Sean George. Right? For me, the best in the United States was decided when Zhilei Zhang beat Deontay Wilder. Right? Let's just say right now, the situation in America in terms of the heavyweight division isn't as robust as it is in the United Kingdom. Let's talk about the second interesting heavyweight from yesterday, David Adelaide. Right now, let me just say, Adelaide is sudden. You need to know this guy. He's sudden. He's heavy-handed. If he lands on you, I don't think there is a heavyweight who can take his punch. In other words, this is the fastball pitcher, right? The problem with Adelaide, who can be outside and then be inside hurting you, who has ring coverage on power shots. The problem with Adelaide is what's happening between the power shots. In other words, Adelaide's outside. You can tell he's inspired by Roy Jones. Roy Jones Jr. was a high wire act. He was a freak athlete who, in his prime, could get by on feints and could stay outside, and who wasn't a guy who engaged you for protracted periods of time. Right? Very different than a Floyd Mayweather, who actually would engage with you and knew how to block everything you were throwing. Even though Mayweather was a freak athlete, Mayweather knew how to box for prolonged periods of time. Right? Roy Jones, a little bit different. Roy Jones, in his prime, great fighter. I'm not saying he wasn't a great fighter. Right? One of the best ever, certainly on the very short list. Goes through a stretch where he's as dominant a fighter as I've ever seen. Right? Beats Virgil Hill, beats Mike McCallum. The McCallum fight was not that close. Right? Granted, those guys were older, but just to understand, Jones was going up against Hall of Fame competition and was winning those fights by margin. He stops Virgil Hill, which is hard to do. Right? Understand, he fought Vinnie Paz, who recently got inducted in the Hall of Fame. And I believe that's the only fight on record where you had a 3-minute round and two ranked fighters, where one fighter did not land a punch in the round. Right? Such was Roy Jones. Now, Adelaide is not Roy Jones, but he's an athlete. Right? You want to bet the volatility on Adelaide fights. This guy can knock anyone out. He's sudden. He's that sudden. It's a gift. He's more sudden than almost anybody else in the heavyweight division. Right? The problem is, if the fight goes to the scorecard, he's going to have problems. The problem is, he's not defensively blessed. The Jamie TKV fight was marred because, and it's questionable, off a break, Adelaide badly hurts TKV. Right? There are many calling for a rematch. Understand, TKV is one of these guys below the scene who has sparred with almost everybody. Truth be told, TKV has an excellent jab. Right? He just fought for the British heavyweight title. You need to keep an eye on him. His jab was bothering Adelaide. Right? Just understand, the theme here is that in today's heavyweight division, where several men could be king, you need to bet volatility. Right? Torres, I believe very few will be able to keep him out of the pocket. Very few. Let me just say, with Adelaide, you're dealing with dynamite. Right? This guy's not even trying to wear you down. He hits so hard and he's so sudden that he only has to be right once. So against clunky heavyweights, right, this guy is the kind of guy who can just stay outside, outmaneuver them as a Roy Jones would. Right? You know, feints, be outside, then suddenly jump in, catch a guy unprepared momentarily, and can end the fight. Right? This is a name you need to remember. Let's talk about a third. And this is the best heavyweight of this group. Let me go one step further. Right? And I know people just don't believe it, and that's great. More beer for me. This guy is a boxer who can throw high percentage power shots. He has some of the fastest hands in the division. He's not Andy Ruiz, I'll concede that. But he has some of the fastest hands in the division. This guy is the threat to actually outbox you, as well as to stop you. Now, let me just say, I'm watching the Zone. And this guy, Filip Hrgovic, is doing his ring walk into the ring. Now, let me just say, the Zone's been around for a long time, a few years. They have deals with Golden Boy, Matchroom, Queensberry, right? This is a boxing outfit presenting boxing to the public, right? These are, the insiders. This is the industry. This is not Dana White coming in and it's new and, it's a new outfit trying to distinguish themselves. No, this is the old guard. So then, this fighter, Filip Hrgovic, who's lost once, in a fight he's winning after 5 rounds, against now heavyweight champion Daniel Dubois. As Hrgovic walks in the ring, on the telecast, the announcer says, words to the effect, I'm paraphrasing. He says, there are some out there who thought this fighter was the heir apparent. But he's had a disappointing run of it. Right, folks? I was stunned. Let me just say this diplomatically. He fought an unbeaten Zhilei Zhang, one of the men who could be king. The guy I just said is the best heavyweight in the United States. Right? Understand, Zhilei Zhang is on the precipice of winning that fight after knocking down Hrgovic. Understand, too, Zhang's a tough matchup because Zhang is a southpaw power puncher who's two-handed. Right? As I make this video, Zhilei Zhang's still dangerous. It's really a tribute to Joe Parker, a guy who's been heavyweight champion, and Ajit Kabayel, the premier body puncher in the heavyweight division, that they were able to beat Zhilei Zhang. Understand, too, you throw in Joe Joyce, you throw in Deontay Wilder, you throw in Filip Hrgovic, and you understand that Zhilei Zhang, more than most, is fighting the toughest competition in the heavyweight division. Right? Well, understand, in his fight against Hrgovic, Hrgovic needed to close strongly to have a chance to win that fight. And that's what he did. Right, folks, that's not a bad performance. That's not a disappointing performance. Understand, Hrgovic's bleeding from the top of his head from a headbutt. That was a great finish. Right then, Hrgovic's only loss is to Daniel Dubois. Dubois is offensively blessed. You saw that in the AJ fight. Right, Hrgovic comes out. Hrgovic's landing right hand after right hand. He's off to a fast start. It's only because Daniel Dubois is able to take right hand after right hand that you get the outcome you have in that fight. Right, so here's Hrgovic walking in the ring, and the narrative on an established boxing network was completely off. For the record, I didn't just consider Hrgovic to be the heir apparent. Folks, I still consider Hrgovic to be the heir apparent. I just want people to be clear on this. So let me just say this. Hrgovic enters the ring. Let's talk Joe Joyce for a moment. I know Joe takes a lot of punches. Okay, fair enough. I understand visually. Joe Joyce looks like he lacks hand speed. Right? I need for folks to think this through. You have a reigning heavyweight champion right now, Daniel Dubois, who lost to Joe Joyce. Right? Understand, it's not like Joe is fighting scrubs either. He fights Zhili Zhang twice. Now, I don't know about you, but on my scorecard, I had Joe ahead of Derek Chisora. Now, Joe made a mistake late in that fight. Close fight. Joe gets dropped. In a close fight, a 10-8 round's not going to help you when you're the 8. Right? Okay. Not a problem. Just understand. Folks, Joe Joyce could be king. I know he's older. Folks, he fits in with Zhili Zhang's age. Deontay Wilder's age. Right? This Luis Ortiz's age. This is the heavyweight division. Heavyweights age more slowly. Right, so let me just say I'm reading the paper and, or really online, right, newspapers, and every other boxing pundit is saying, Filip Hrgovic has edged Joe Joyce closer to retirement. Right, let me quote Joe Joyce. Are you not entertained? Folks, the Joe Joyce who showed up and fought Filip Hrgovic was an inspired Joe Joyce. He looked to be in better shape than Filip Hrgovic. Folks, for crying out loud, look at Hrgovic's knockout percentage. Joe Joyce just went the distance with Filip Hrgovic. That's an accomplishment. Right, folks, Joe Joyce is still in the running. Let me just say this. I am concerned about any fighter who takes the number of big shots that a Joe Joyce takes. There is a health concern. Right? But understand, it's Joe Joyce's decision on whether he wants to continue. I'm also a bit amazed that there's a sentiment in boxing to give Derek Chisora, who himself has fought top-line competition, several heavyweight champs in his past, and who has taken some big shots and who has suffered some devastating knockouts. Does anyone remember the David Haye knockout of Derek Chisora? Does anyone remember the last Tyson Fury fight? I mean, I'm watching that fight and I almost wanted to try to jump into my TV so I could hop in the ring to wave off the fight. Derek Chisora has been in some fights where he's been beaten up, folks. There's no outcry At least none that I'm seeing. For Derek Chisora to leave the sport right away for health reasons, but yet we're so eager to push Joe Joyce into retirement. Folks, Joe Joyce fought an inspired fight yesterday. Now let's talk about Filip Hrgovic, because we need to clear this up here. Right? I'm listening to the Zone. They were stunned that it was a unanimous decision. Now I want you to think about that, because I'm going to read some CompuBox numbers. They were stunned it was a unanimous decision. One of the guys on the Zone was saying, hey, right now I think Hrgovic might be ahead. Right? The lead commentator was saying, I'm not sure if either of these guys will be heavyweight champion. Are you sure about that, given that Joe has already beaten Dubois? Given that Dubois was getting tossed like a salad for the first 5 rounds of the Hrgovic fight? Folks, I didn't understand the commentary. Right now, I'm not here to say that Hrgovic's a flawless fighter. Truth be told, he got busted up by Daniel Dubois. Right, his face got busted up in this fight. He had softness around his eyes. Right, in this fight. And it's a key secret to understanding Filip Hrgovic. He gets cut early. He goes to his corner. He looked dejected. I'm not here to deny that. He looked dejected. Bad body language. And you can't correct that. Right? I'm sure we all have that friend who always looks depressed. Right? Everything's going well for them, but oh my goodness, on that last test, they got a B. They didn't get an A. Oh, it's the end of the world. Right? You can tell Hrgovic's hard on himself. He goes to his corner. This is a key part of Hrgovic. His cornerman just happens to be the former cornerman of Hall of Famer Terrible Terry Norris, who was terrific. The cornerman of future Hall of Famer Gennady Golovkin. His cornerman happens to be Abel Sanchez. Right? I believe even Joe Joyce used to go to Sanchez's Big Beer Gym. Right? Sanchez looks at his fighter. Sanchez understands that privately his fighter's hard on himself. That his fighter has bad body language. So Sanchez, and it's comforting to see a fighter with this level of talent have an A-level trainer. Sanchez says to him, words to the effect, I'm paraphrasing, that cut, we'll take care of it. Right? Sanchez just understood the tone. He understood the fighter. He needed to calm down the fighter. He needed to let the fighter know after the fighter fought Dubois and had that fight end on cuts, and then come out here against Joe Joyce and get cut early. Sanchez needed his fighter to know, hey, player, look, we got this. I got your back on this cut. We'll take care of it. By the way, they did. Right? We'll take care of it. You're doing well. That's important for a fighter like Hrgovic. Right? Hrgovic needs a cheerleading section. I'll concede that. I'm not saying Hrgovic's perfect. Here's what I am saying. He just fought Joe Joyce. Right? Joe Joyce is fresh off of a blood and guts fight against Derek Chisora. Let me just tell you a few stats. They're staggering. Filip Hrgovic, understand, this is the talent level. Right? This is the fighter who, during the fight, the DAZN broadcaster is telling you that this guy with one loss doesn't look like he's going to be heavyweight champion. During that fight, First round, Hrgovic lands 54.4% of his punches. This is CompuBox, right? 54.4% of his punches. Second round, 43.6% of his punches. Third round, 60%. Fourth round, 50%. Folks, this is against a fighter who used to be the mandatory. Fifth round, 47.3%. Sixth round, right? I myself have questions about Hrgovic's stamina. Sixth round, 51.1%. Seventh round, 55.8%. Eighth round, 46.2%. Ninth round, 48.4%. 10th round, 46.2%. Would it shock you to know that Filip Hrgovic just fought Joe Joyce and over 10 rounds, 10, lands 50.4% of his punches? By contrast, Joe Joyce, in an inspired performance, lands 26.8% of his punches. Folks, the guys on the zone watched this fight, and at the end of the fight, they were wondering who won it. Now, I have to say this diplomatically. If you're a gambler, you're looking for reality. You're looking for situations like this, where there's a gap between public perception and what's actually going on. The CompuBox numbers are what's actually going on. Filip Hrgovic, folks, if you haven't guessed it, is an elite fighter. Right? There are very few, let me repeat that, there are very few in the heavyweight division who have even the possibility of outboxing him. Right? Daniel Dubois took a knee against Joe Joyce. By contrast, Filip Hrgovic just landed more than 50% of his shots against Joe Joyce. Right, folks? This was a dominant performance. Right? 2 of the 3 judges got it right. One judge had Hrgovic winning by 1 round. How is that possible? On the zone, the sensible guy, we'll call him, kept talking about how while Joe Joyce was, in great shape and, had the great attitude and was, making the great effort, the guy kept saying that the quality of work, that's the phrase he used, the quality of work that Filip Hrgovic was doing, he thought gave Hrgovic the edge. You look at a Richard Torres, Torres doesn't have anything resembling the back foot of Filip Hrgovic. I'll concede Torres is a difficult matchup for anybody, right? He's a Mike Tyson type figure. He's on his front foot, he's hard to find, he's an excellent athlete. But in terms of skills, he's not this efficient. That's the word you have to use. Right? He's not this efficient. Understand, this fight comes after Hrgovic is using Dubois' chin for target practice. Right? Let me just say, Adelaide, probably a better puncher than Filip Hrgovic. Right? Adelaide really is a gifted puncher. But understand, Adelaide can't box like this. Right? Filip Hrgovic is outboxing Joe Joyce. Let me say, too, you're watching the fight. Hrgovic's right hand is one of the best in boxing. Now, he's landing it on Joe Joyce. This is not the first fight you've seen. A guy with big punches landing shots on Joe Joyce, and Joe Joyce not going down. right? Joe Joyce taking the punch. We know Zhilei Zhang's a puncher, don't we? That first fight was stopped because Joe Joyce's eye was blown up. Right? Joe Joyce, just like here, was trying not to blink as Zhilei Zhang was landing hellacious shots on him. Understand, Filip Hrgovic just fought two bluffers. Right? Daniel Dubois is there getting hit with right hand after right hand, and Dubois is just working through it. Right here you have Joe Joyce getting hit with right hand after right hand, and Joe Joyce is working through it. Folks, Hrgovic's a puncher. Right, just understand, Hrgovic's right hand is sudden. It's one of the best punches in the heavyweight division. But more importantly, there are segments of this fight where Joe Joyce goes looking for Filip Hrgovic. And believe it or not, a guy whose nickname is the Juggernaut can't throw punches because Hrgovic's moving just enough. Then when Joyce throws punches, you'll notice Hrgovic has his upper body on a swivel. Right? This is a big guy like Vianello. So, let's just say this. I'm not here to say that if Hrgovic gets caught by Adelaide or gets caught by Torres, that he wouldn't go down. Right? He went down after getting caught by Zhilei Zhang. Right? This is a big hitting heavyweight era. Right? If he's caught, Hrgovic could get dropped. But what I am saying is, folks, this is top of the food chain. Right? Tyson Fury would still have to beat Tyson Fury to have a chance against Filip Hrgovic. Right? Understand, if Fury isn't Tyson Fury anymore, if he's gotten older and Father Time catches up with all of us eventually, he'd have a problem against Filip Hrgovic. Right? Who's more sudden to you, Anthony Joshua or Filip Hrgovic? Right, folks? I know the Usyk crowd, and understand, I've been an Usyk fan for years. You'd be surprised. But I know the Usyk crowd is going to feel that I'm picking on Usyk every time I say, hey, this guy would give Usyk a hard fight. Folks, that's the burden of being heavyweight champion. Right? Just like we talk about Canelo. And, every time there's some new person, right? Diego Pacheco. We say, hey, this guy against Canelo, how would Canelo do? Right? I need for folks to understand that, Usyk isn't as big as Hrgovic. Hrgovic has a gift where he can loop his punches. Hrgovic also has one of the most sudden right hands in the sport. Hrgovic has legs. He's not the level of athlete, I'll concede this. He's not the level of athlete that Joseph Parker is. But understand, he's a better athlete than Tyson Fury is currently. Right, to sum up, this guy is one of the most dangerous men in the heavyweight division. Now, I understand. As George Foreman once said, you go in the ring, you lose. Suddenly, the people you came in the ring with are over on the other side of the ring. Words to that effect. It's like, suddenly your entourage is the other person's entourage. My words, not Foreman's. I'm paraphrasing what Foreman said. I get the idea that Dubois fight was an excellent opportunity for Filip Hrgovic. And he did not deliver that night. Right, folks? If that's his only loss, it's premature. It's premature for the folks on the zone to tell you that he used to be the heir apparent. And it's been a tough time for him. right? It's stunning that in a fight where he's landing over 50% of his shots against a former mandatory contender who's come in shape and who's trying to bring it, it's a little bit surprising that they would say that, it doesn't look like Joyce or Hrgovic is ever going to be heavyweight champ. If that's the narrative you're believing in, my advice to you is to don't follow narratives. Right? You may have heard Vianello got roughed up by Richard Torres. Folks, that Vianello fight is actually an endorsement of Vianello. The way he turns the fight around. So here you had an even more interesting moment for boxing. You had a zone guy interviewing Joe Joyce. It's during this interview that Joyce says, "Are you not entertained?" And the crowd cheers. And you would have thought that the, interviewer was interviewing Joe after he received a terminal cancer diagnosis. Right? The interviewer was talking to Joe as if Joe was in the past tense. Right, folks? Do you really believe that it's over for Joe Joyce? So soon after he got Daniel Dubois, who actually now has a share of the title and who needs to avoid Joe Joyce, in my eyes, to take a knee. Right, folks? As old as Joe Joyce is, how old is Alexander Usyk? Aren't they around the same age? I don't understand the double standard here in boxing. Derek Chisora is supposed to be ready for a fight against Daniel Dubois when his fight against Joe Joyce was razor close. I mean, I thought Joyce was winning the fight. I thought when Chisora goes over to the ropes, Joe Joyce should have done what Foreman should have done in the Rumble in the Jungle. Should have waved at him, right? Joyce should have thought to himself, well, this is a close fight. I might be ahead. Right? Here's Derek Chisora over by the ropes hoping to counter me. Why would I follow him over by the ropes? Right? Let the guy know, player, you need these rounds at least as much as I do. Here I am in the middle of the ring. Right, folks? The heavyweight division's wide open. To sum up, heavyweight division's wide open. There's going to be volatility. There'll be some big upsets. Right? Because you have sudden punchers. There's some people out there I haven't even named. Right? Moses Atama. He's supposed to be a big puncher. Right? He's a young guy. He's already in the building. Right? What I want people to realize, though, is that a guy who lost yesterday, Guido Vianello, should still be in the conversation. Another guy who lost yesterday, Joe Joyce, should still be in the conversation. Finally, a guy who won yesterday, Filip Hrgovic, wasn't just the heir apparent in the past, folks. He's the heir apparent right now. Right? That's the way you should think of guys who fight world-class opposition and who land over 50% of their punches. By the way, let me emphasize how impressive this is. When I say over 50% of his punches, understand, he lands over 55% of his power shots. He was not fighting an amateur. He was fighting a guy who beat Daniel Dubois and who beat Joe Parker. Let's figure out who Joe Joyce is. Right? Against that level of opposition, Filip Hrgovic lands 55.8% of his power shots. Let's be clear here, too, on the punch distribution. It's not like he threw 6 power shots and landed 3. No, he threw 369 power shots. Let's do the math. 10-round fight. Filip Hrgovic is throwing 36 power shots a round. Just think about that number. and he ends up landing 206 power shots in the 10-round fight. Hrgovic just went through a fight where he's landing 20 power shots a round against the guy who beat Dubois and Parker. Right? So I know, I've read the comments. Somebody, after my video yesterday, said, wouldn't it be funny if the heir apparent lost? Okay, fine. I know the heir apparent's a line that's going to stick with me and that I'm stitched to Filip Hrgovic's career. I'm cool with that. This is an elite fighter. Those are my thoughts. Let me hear yours in the comment section of this YouTube video. Thanks for stopping by.